The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett.
Everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants that eternal kiss. Yeah, everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one life in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing Om
On the Expansion Zone, we examine life and our quest to understand who and what we are and of the vastness of human potentials. We explore the making of our world from quantum physics to parapsychology, health, sociology, and philosophy, along with practical living. You are reminded of the possibilities in creating personal change. So for an hour, we'll stimulate and expand the mind.
Shanti, 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 Shanti. Sing the world. Let's do it together. Shanti, 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 Shanti. It's time to wake up.
Well, welcome once again to another edition of the Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett. I am, of course, your host, Sonia Barrett, and it is Monday once again. And thank you for tuning in to KPFK at 90.7 FM, and also for those listening at kpfk.org, listening to the streaming broadcast. Well, wishing you the best that the week has to offer, and that you will find clarity and peace as needed. These are definitely overwhelming times, and it's so very important that we put to the forefront the health of our minds. That's so important. So with that said, today's quote is this: take care of your mind, your body will thank you. Take care of your body, your mind will thank you. And that's by Debbie Hampton. And as always, I like to elaborate on that for a couple of minutes in just a moment. But today's topic is the carnivore diet. Are the health benefits of meat being downplayed? Also, what should we know maybe about purely plant-based diets? And our guest today is Dr. Shawn Baker MD. He's also the author of the Carnivore Diet. And so this is going to be an interesting conversation because I have been waiting to really chat with him about this topic, this very important topic. So in reference to take care of your mind, your body will thank you. Take care of your body, your mind will thank you, by Debbie Hampton. Well, I think in these current times, with the constant echoing of a lot of fear based on the health crisis or the political arena, this has become a time of stress for many people. And somehow we are all mentally shaken in some way. And so we must really examine where our focus is placed. Is it 24/7 in a state of fear and panic? Are we in hiding? Are you feeling anxious? And whatever those feelings are, you are fully aware that your inner calm is not the same, that it's disrupted. This is where we must take action and really find ways to shift the mind from the fearful external narratives. If you calm the mind, you will calm the body enough for it to do what it naturally wants to do, which is to repair itself, to aim to heal itself as needed. And if outside support is needed, then you will be able to make a more sound, more grounded decision, because it's not based on fear, but really being able to tune into the body, listening and finding out, what it needs and what you can do as well. So if we calm ourselves enough, as I said, we can actually hear the body's attempt to tell us what it needs, what's missing. So today we're going to dive into a conversation that, again, I've been wanting to discuss on the show. So short bio, well, I shouldn't say short bio. I condensed it because this guest has just been a master at life, at really so many things that he's done. And that's Dr. Shawn Baker MD, a doctor, an athlete, a father, and a proponent of the carnivore diet. Orthopedic surgeon. He's, as I said, an athlete, world record holder, CEO at MeatRx, author of the Carnivore Diet, an international speaker, podcast host, consultant, and a lifetime of pursuing excellence, pushing the boundaries and not settling for mediocrity. He is also soldier and revolutionist. And as we said, he's also a father. His website is shawn-baker.com. And so I would like to welcome you, Dr. Shawn Baker, to the Expansion Zone. So happy to have you here.
Sonia, thanks for that wonderful welcome. And I just want to echo what you brought up. I mean, it is definitely well described that the mind and the body are inextricably and beautifully intertwined. And I think, you do see that when we have a healthy mind, our body seems to follow, and the same with the converse. And so I think that's a great way to start.
Absolutely. Well, let's see, where can we start? Well, I could say, what is the carnivore diet? And we could start there, and you can tell us really what made you even go in that direction. So whichever position you think, those should take, you could go ahead and sort of address that. Which came first, it's the chicken or the egg thing. What came first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, I think defining what I like to interpret as a carnivore diet, and to be fair, I was kind of the one that kind of gave this sort of style of eating that particular name. There's other people that use sort of a zero carb approach, but I felt that kind of lost the essence of what was trying to be done. And so when I go and lecture and talk to people about this, and the way I describe it is a carnivore diet is a diet that prioritizes animal foods as a main source of nutrition. Some people will go to completely eliminate all plant food, to the degree necessary. And I think when I talk about what is a degree necessary, it's not based on any sort of ideologic belief or, sort of ethical or environmental beliefs. It's basically just the goal is to be healthy. And that definition is varied depending on who you ask. Some people just want to be happy and be free of pain. Other people want to subscribe to a certain set of biomarkers and so on and so forth. So if we put in mind our goal is health, and the degree of sort of strictness, I suppose, is going to vary from person to person. Myself, I'm pretty strict right now. I'm very strict just because it's, kind of this World Carnivore Month in January. And so every year I've really tightened things up. And so I just pretty much just eating, basically meat and nothing else outside of a little bit of salt and water. What led me there was, again, a quest for my own personal health, and it was both mental health and physical health. And so I had found that by trying all different types of diet, I didn't just kind of randomly decide I'm going to eat meat. I was a very calculated and well thought out decision, and that came from over a decade of experimenting with nutrition. And like you'd mentioned, I've been an athlete and a physician, and really testing what actually works for me. And coincidentally, it seems to work well for other people too. But that's how I kind of came to this sort of meat-based approach. And I've been so far pretty happy with the way it's worked for not only myself, but the tens of thousands of other people now that have taken upon themselves to try it as well.
Okay, so we kind of covered that idea as to what we're speaking about. For some, I have to be honest. The first time that it was mentioned to me, it was a friend, and she said that she was experimenting with it. And the first thing you think is meat. What? You're just eating meat? And immediately that was this huge thing in my mind. Not to a ridiculous point, but it was like, just meat. Because you know how our minds are. We kind of programmed to operate a specific way. So something outside of the norm just kind of throws you. And she was telling me all the wonderful effects and feelings that she was getting from that. And I must admit that not maybe shortly after, I wasn't trying to do that. But I had decided, because of some things I was experiencing, to just go a lot more protein. And then I sort of ended up for a short period of time in that zone. And I did feel the difference. I mean, I really, and I'm an energized person, but there were definitely things that I felt from it. So I'm just saying that so people can open their minds, whoever it is that's listening, open your minds to this idea. All right. So now where should we travel? Because this is not new in terms of society, in terms of, all these different groups that have existed on the planet for, history for a long time. And so they've lived this way. Do you want to address that? I don't think people remember that this was normal for a lot of societies that have existed on the planet.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic. And I think that and I'll sort of transition to this part afterwards, but I think if we go back and look at the history of humanity, and I tend to take an evolutionary view, and I think that human beings, as defined as things like Homo habilis, which sort of evolved around 2.8 million years ago out in, Central Africa or Eastern Africa, we started out eating a fairly meat-heavy diet. This is what allowed us to grow our brain size. We have primates. People point to chimpanzees and orangutans and gorillas and monkeys that have been living in the sort of tropical locations for a long time, 25 plus million years. And despite that, they never managed to evolve past about a 300 cc brain. Even the biggest gorillas only have a relatively small brain. And the diet, which is, plant-based, fruit-based, a few bugs, some of them do some hunting. In fact, chimpanzees are very vicious hunters, but they don't do that much of it. That small amount of animal protein, animal fat was not sufficient to, level up to the brain size that we have as humans. And so it's only once we sort of figured out, and we were forced to figure this out due to climate change. 3 million years ago, we started to enter these glaciations where the polar caps froze, and we started having different degrees of, losses of that rich tropical environment. 5 million years ago, Africa was covered from tip to top completely in forest and jungle. And as the polar ice caps started to appear, 5 million years ago, 3 million years ago, they started to lose that. We started to see drying out. We started to see the development of savannas, which we have today in modern Africa. And so when that occurred, these previous primates had to make decisions, and some of them went on a plant-based diet, and these would be things like Paranthropus robustus and Paranthropus boisei. They developed these super strong, powerful jaws to chew through the woody, brush that they would eat to get sustenance. But they ended up going extinct because they couldn't adapt long enough. There just wasn't enough environmental things that would support their existence, eventually. And Homo sapiens, which arrived from perhaps Homo erectus, it's kind of very more convoluted than a strict linear path. But regardless, the hunting aspect of it gave us this nutrition, this huge amount of nutritional reserve, this energy, this fat that was required to evolve that huge brain that we now have. Interestingly, and most people don't know this, that the actual human brain is actually shrunken by about 200 cc's once we took up the sort of agricultural dietary scheme. So, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, we had a 1,500 cc brain. Our brain is now shrunk down to about 1,300 cc's.
Wow.
Because of the agricultural influence and the loss of nutrition. And so, as we, sort of went from this situation where maybe we weren't fully carnivorous, I think humans are probably what I would call a facultative carnivore, which means we can live without eating meat, but we tend to do best when we do eat meat, and particularly if we eat a lot of meat. And so that is kind of the evolutionary framework, which I think most people would argue is fairly accurate. Surely, we had some fruit. Surely we came across some other food, some nuts, some grains that we would add from time to time. But it's not until we lost all these big animals, we had the megafaunal extinctions driven largely by human overhunting throughout the world. Wherever humans sort of evolved and went across, we saw it in Australia, we saw it in North America, we saw it across the Pacific Islands. Wherever humans went, within a few thousand years, the big animals generally were killed off. And so we kind of overate our food supply. And then we sort of had to figure out what do we do? So we end up eating the skinny little animals. We can't get as much energy or fat from them. So we get a lot of lean protein, but we can't get the energy requirements to run our, energy hungry brain. And so then we started to figure out, well, now we got to figure out how to process these plants and refine these plants and access to nutrition that's found in nuts and tubers and seeds and so on and so forth, many of which are poisonous. They'll actually kill us. Most people don't realize that things like, raw cashews, and I'm not talking raw cashews from the grocery store, but actual raw cashews off the tree, are very deadly for humans. So we figured out how to do this to access that energy. And the interesting thing is, I think as different populations figure this out earlier, like we can point to the Middle East, some people call it the basket of humanity. This is where agriculture first evolved. Perhaps some of those people have better capacity to tolerate grains as compared to people that discovered this later, maybe Native Americans, maybe Pacific Islanders, those folks which kind of continue to rely on hunting as their main sustenance, now do worse when we see that. So there's the interesting, I think all humans have a capacity to eat meat. I would argue that many of them probably can tolerate fruit as well. But when you start adding these novel ingredients, the grains, the dairy products, which are also new, we see different ability to tolerate that.
Yes. Now some people might argue when you talk about grains, obviously that it's because it's genetically modified. It didn't used to affect us at one point, and of course, with that said, the genetic modification of many of these grains, like wheat, is very rough on the digestive system. Um, but at the same time, is there then it seemed to be a difference. Let me just say that from the testimonials, not just on your site, but from what I've seen, that when people are eating meat, when they decide to go in that area of diet, and they're not doing grains, they seem to be okay with digesting the meat, but the grain, you know what I mean? But the grain is a problem, even though it's genetically modified. But why is that then that the meat doesn't seem to be such a problem with folks being able to digest it if they're doing mainly a protein diet like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to call a carnivore diet a mostly protein diet, because truly it's probably a more fat-based diet, because if we look at the caloric content of meat, unless you're eating the very extremely lean cuts, which most people don't do, and I don't certainly recommend, you're getting the majority of your calorie from fat, and it's usually 60%. But to address your question, I think that one of the interesting things about grain, and there's different types of grain. Some people talk about the Eichhorn grain, which was the kind of the ancient grain that's been modified, and we have different types of wheat now. I think beyond that, we've modified it with refining. And so if you think about, normal foods you would have had access to, say 500 years ago, you don't even have to go back very far, even 200 years ago, you had to chew your food, swallow it. Your body would then, act upon it, your digestive, your stomach, and then your small intestine, and then, it would be absorbed largely by the small intestine. But nowadays, because we refine things, we turn foods into powders, basically. We turn something that would normally be a lot larger and would be absorbed much more slowly, and meat's a perfect example of this. Meat takes a long time for us to fully digest and to absorb, but we do that, and we do that very well. But when we look at these refined grains, these flours, these sugars, these sodas and things like that, that is absorbed in extremely rapid fashion, which is not something humans normally would have been in contact with. That's something very rare. And so what we're having is there's these things called the incretin hormones that are part of our GI system that are supposed to be stimulated in a sequential fashion in a certain timing, but we overwhelm those things, and we end up with a lot of metabolic dysfunction to this. And I think we end up with this. The other thing that's overlaid on there is gut dysbiosis. And so we talk about the normal healthy bacteria of the gut, or the normal function of the gut. Some of that has to do with permeability. And so I think the modern diets of industrialized foods, whether they're refined grains or artificial sweeteners or just refined sugar, and things like some of the oils, some of the seed oils, which humans never were exposed to outside of the last 100 years. You look at things like canola oil and corn oil. Humans didn't eat that, outside of, maybe around the turn of the century, the 19th century. And so, or the 20th century rather, those things I think are causing such dysbiosis of the gut that even because of that, even foods that we may have otherwise normally been able to eat are now difficult for us to process. And I think meat is kind of one of the original foods that we can kind of go back. It's kind of like a reset button. I kind of liken it to the do-over button, because if you think about what is a human diet when we're born, it's an animal-based diet. It's breast milk. And most, if you look at most indigenous humans, a baby will breastfeed for a couple of years, 2.5 years on average. And so that is a kind of the sort of the default basic starting human diet. And if you look at some of the comparative anatomy studies looking at different mammals and saying what would be required to grow the brain that we have, the size that we have, given the weaning times compared to other animals, it's pretty clear that a fat-rich, meat-rich diet was required. Now, we can get around that today because, again, we can refine energy. We can refine calories into ground up, rice cereals and sugars and stuff like that. So we can give that to the kids, so the kids can still get the energy they would have gotten. But outside of that, going back 1,000 years, 10,000 years before we started to be able to refine grains, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So we would have had to have been on a sort of an animal-based diet. So I think that's, I don't know. I think I drifted from the original question.
No.
I don't know
But
if I answered it properly.
No. You did. But you covered all those areas that were necessary to be covered anyway. But also, just looking on once again, I know I keep bringing up history and thousands of years ago, but everything that we know of ancient societies, going back as far back as possible, hunting has always been a part of many of these societies that we know of. Hunting was almost like the number one thing, like the first thing for survival. It seemed like that was one of the core things. Does that make sense? It was one of the core things that human beings seemed to get involved in was hunting.
Yeah, I mean that was our first job, and it was our only job for probably most of the human existence. I mean, you probably had to build shelter, but your day-to-day job was basically survival, and survival meant eating, and eating basically meant hunting. And so we were very good hunters. Even the indigenous tribes today are excellent, tremendous hunters, and the skill, the amount of intelligence it took to be able to track and hunt these animals is not trivial. It is incredibly difficult and challenging to survive and to thrive hunting. And so we were clearly able to do that. And your point is that it doesn't matter where people are. You can be in the tropics surrounded by fruits, and we see these indigenous tribes that do this. They have all kinds of opportunities for plant food. They've got all the fruits in the world, and yet they still hunt, and yet they still dedicate 4 to 6 hours a day hunting. We see this in South America and Africa and other places. I mean, this is what they do because they know how incredibly important animal source foods are to their survival and their health. And so that's what we've always done.
And it seemed as if for many of these societies then, as you said, it was very difficult. But I also think that they were a lot more tuned in to nature, the land, the movement of the animals. It was a completely different focus. They didn't have the kind of distraction that we have now with what we call civilized society. Not knocking it, but it was just a very different time. That was your life, was nature-based all day long from morning till night. So I think that was different.
Clearly it would have to have been. I mean, you think about it, no TV, no computers, no phones, no restaurants. I think one of the things, and we talk about the circadian rhythm, and probably early man probably spent time, watching the sunsets, watching the sunrise. If you think about it, just go outside, stand by the ocean and watch the sunrise or the sunset. It's almost hypnotizing. It's captivating. It's a wonderful. I don't think anyone dislikes watching a sunset. I mean, it's always just such a uplifting experience. And I think that's kind of, how we set our clock. And, you think about it, what would you do? Well, you would spend time with people that were around you. And you might have lived in a small clan of 20, 50, 20, 30 people maybe. So you would have these close interactions, close human contact. Your day would be storytelling and playing, and you intersperse with hunting and eating. But I mean, that would be what you would do. And I think probably humans were happier than we are today.
Absolutely. I mean, I sometimes I sit around and I start wondering, is there a way that I could perhaps go do that for a minute? Maybe I'm romanticizing, but sometimes you do. I think all human beings, because it's at our core. Some of these things are just part of our psyche. It's there. It doesn't matter how engaged we are in our corporate lives and so on. There are some things that I think are just part of us. where we want freedom. There's a level of freedom that we want, but I don't think we realize that some of that is the hunger for the simplicity of that kind of living. Surely nobody wants to get out and hunt, but there was a simplicity to it. You mentioned the sunset and I think I mentioned that I lived in Laguna Niguel and close to the beach. So I used to, when I come home from work, I would go hiking. I'd hike to the beach. It was, what is it? Technically 5 miles or something like that away if you drove, or maybe less. But walking is a completely different thing. And I would walk there and I would sit and I would watch the sunset. And it was so calming. Something simple, very simple like that. And I think we need to get back to that simplicity because it does impact the body. It impacts the body in so many ways in terms of reducing stress and so on. So I just wanted to throw that out while we're so immersed in our, civilized world.
Sure. I think that's great. And I think the other thing is human contact. I think even not even human contact, but, you see it in other animals. Other animals do better when they have like animals with them. We see it in other primates. We see it in, our pets. We see it in all kinds of different animals that, they crave contact, and I think we all know that. And so I think it's important. And, as we see, you mentioned we're going through difficult times with people being locked indoors and, it's sort of not allowed to spend time with loved ones, or potentially that can be the case. And you can see that it's hardwired into our human nervous systems, I suppose. And I think that's something that is, we're seeing the pushback on that. And I think people are appreciating that more based on the fact that we're losing that, or we seem to be losing that. And you're right, the constant sort of anonymity of being, on a virtual platform or virtual world is, it takes a toll, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's not normal to our brains, to our mind. It's just not natural. And that reminds me. So for anybody who's listening, please understand where I'm coming from. Don't take offense. But I tell you, when I drive by, and in LA, we do have a lot of homeless people everywhere. Everybody knows about that now, that's a huge thing. But when I see these folks, they bond together. They are like together. They are together. They're laughing. They're in their own way. They are enjoying each other's company. And there is a level of stress that is not there. Okay, we get it. You want to take your shower and all of that. I get that part. But I think sometimes we have to look beyond, just look a little bit deeper. There is something to be said about that. So, okay, I hope people take that in the light intended.
Yeah, I think all of us secretly sort of envy people that have no responsibility and no cares in the world. I sometimes think, because I went through medical training in school, and I've got a company now, and it's go, and it's always a lot of responsibility. And I think, if I'm reincarnated, maybe I want to just be like a Rastafarian and hang out on the beach and, just have fun, and maybe hopefully if things work out, my retirement will look something like that, where I can just run and play and just play, and I think that's the other thing that's free. Playing is free, smiling is free, laughing is free, hugs are free. And, those things that, you talk about money can't buy you. Money can make problems go away. It can make money problems go away, and it can certainly free you up potentially to experience those things. But my gosh, the best things in life, are those experiences. I think experiences certainly trump any kind of materialistic things.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'd like to get into to more. Obviously, we're going to do that, but we are definitely going to go ahead and take a break right now. And when we come back, we are going to look at some other questions that I have in terms of, inflammation. There's so many people who have talked about their inflammation being gone, switching to this kind of diet and lifestyle, and it not really in their minds being a diet, but it's just a way of life that is working for their body. So stay tuned, and we will be right back after this brief break. Okay, and we are back. We're, of course, coming to you from KPFK 90.7 FM in Southern California and streaming live at kpfk.org. You are listening to The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett, and that's me, your host. And my guest today is Dr. Shawn Baker, MD, author of The Carnivore Diet. And so let me just say this quickly too. I needed to throw this in about the reality Wednesdays that I do every first Wednesday of the month. It's a free teleconference. We've been doing for the last couple of years. So I just want to remind people about that. Reality Wednesday is what it's called. It's a free teleconference once a month, and we get into all kinds of edgy conversations and topics. So go to therealsoniabarrett.com to be able to check that out. Go to events and then free workshop, and you will see that information there. All right. So getting back to this conversation with Dr. Shawn here. Now, a lot of people I notice have talked about um, getting rid of, inflammation through this kind of diet, and so many things that they've said that they've been healed. Now, I've seen pictures, again, not just from your site, but other people on Instagram who are talking about having switched to this way of eating. And I noticed the lean bodies, and it really does make you want to go there on it to really get into that ideal shape. What is happening? Why? I mean, and you've talked about it to some degree, but yeah, what is happening? Why the inflammation, and for some people, their diabetes and their digestive issues, and many of these, their hormone balance. One woman was talking about the mood swings that she was having, and she was kind of always down, and the connection with, with gut, IBS, all those things. What is it that causes the body to respond in that way when people go on this kind of eating?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things going on with that, but I think the sort of thing is the concept that food is related to disease. I mean, I think, and health. I think it's clear. I think most people would, if you tell them that food affects your health, most people would agree with that. The question is, people argue about what the right foods are, but clearly by removing problematic foods, and you can debate what those are. I have my opinions on that, does seem to help, and I think that's part of it. But I think also, the nutrition content of what you get in animal source foods is superior, to anything else. And I know that people that are plant-based advocates, which would push back on that. But when you actually look at bioavailability and look at the appropriateness of the foods and the isoforms that they're in, it's clear that animal foods are superior. But as far as inflammation goes on, our gut is our main interface with the external world. And if you think about it, many people don't realize that, but the tube that's inside of us, it starts in our mouth and goes down our esophagus, stomach, small, large intestine, and out the other end, is actually external to our body. And so what we see is food that we put in is coming from the outside of the world, and it's entering our body through the gut mucosa, and we have this very large absorption capacity. Now, our skin, most people say, well, our skin also interacts with the outside world, but our skin is designed to keep everything out. We're not supposed to absorb a lot of stuff through our skin. So we kind of prevent things, unless we get a cut, we cut ourselves and we're vulnerable, but our skin kind of repels things away for the most part, but our gut is designed to absorb everything. And so when you're putting the wrong things in there, and I would argue a lot of the modern foods particularly are the wrong things, that leads to problems with the gut, dysfunction with the gut. There's something called a leaky gut syndrome, which the technical term is, increase, or pathological permeability of the gut mucosa. And so when we get into that, we see this secondary inflammation that occurs secondary to that, and that has downstream effects, and it can cause things like autoimmune disorders. We see that even mental health disorders are associated with gut dysfunction. We see, I see it with joint pain, with arthritis, with diabetes, certainly, looking at some of these foods. I don't necessarily think carbohydrates by themselves are necessarily the bad guy, but I think sometimes carbohydrates come packaged with different things that are irritating. And I know we talk about, vegetables are super healthy and they're great for us. I really think what's going on is vegetables are displacing otherwise junk food. If you're eating broccoli, you're not eating candy bars, hopefully. So I think there's some of that going on. But broccoli, for instance, it's a cruciferous vegetable. We hear about the great things, but we don't talk about the fact that there's compounds that may suppress our thyroid called goitrogens, or there's, lectins or phytic acid and these different compounds that are found in these foods, which can bind minerals so we can't absorb them. But as far as, the weight loss and people getting leaner, I do see that pretty commonly. I don't really promote this as a diet to lose weight. I kind of look at it as a way to eat a nutritious diet that can help you lose weight. It can also help, remove or improve these disease conditions. But what's happening, many people just don't eat as much on the diet because it's very filling. It's hard to eat a lot of, meat-based food. I'm able to eat a decent amount, but I'm a pretty big guy and I train very hard. But the average person finds it, they eat a big steak and eggs for breakfast and they're full all day. They may not want to eat lunch. They may barely want to eat dinner. And so what happens is you see this profound satiety taking place. Coupled with the fact that it's very good quality nutrition, it's higher in protein. We do know that protein has this kind of special benefit in that about 25% of the calories you consume from protein don't actually get utilized as energy. They're expended just to digest that protein. So 25% of the calories from protein are just kind of magically disappear, more or less. I know that's not the technically thing what's going on, but you get this extra amount of food, so you can actually eat a little bit more. And so we see that with meat. There's some new studies out there that kind of maybe suggest that, dropping carbohydrates also has an additive effect, that you might be able to get away with a few extra 100 calories a day. With that's still debated by people. That's very, very contentiously debated. But we see, a lot of people getting leaner. And you're right, it's not just me. It's, there's people all over the world now that are seeing what I've seen. And, I've cataloged hundreds and hundreds. We've got, 600 plus success stories on our website and more every day. People just continue to send their success stories and we just kind of publish them. And I've seen thousands over the years. Some of them we've published, some of them we haven't. But you're right. You're seeing it all over the world. I got people from India, from South Africa, from Australia, from New Zealand, from South America, all saying the same thing. So there's obviously something going on with the human physiology, and it just makes sense to me. I think when you feed an animal the diet it's supposed to eat, the animal's generally healthy. When you feed an animal the wrong diet, you can look at zoo animals. You go to the park and don't feed the ducks human food. We see our dogs and cats in this country, they're obese, they're diabetic because we're feeding them the wrong food. If you were to say, what does a zebra eat? You wouldn't go to the grocery store to pick out zebra food, right? You'd look at the wild zebras and see what they're eating while they're munching on a lot of grass. Maybe zebras need to eat grass. The problem is we don't have any wild humans left to observe. And, everybody's living in offices and that's really been the case since the beginning of civilization with agriculture. Prior to that, wild humans were hunting big animals, and that's where you would determine what we eat. But we're so used to it. We remember what we ate, maybe what our parents ate, and maybe what our grandparents ate, and that's been our whole sort of collective experience on what human beings are supposed to eat. But it's very different from what we eat today.
Wow, I love that. Wild humans or free range.
Yeah, exactly.
Free range humans.
We're all domesticated now, unfortunately.
And that brings, I've got a couple of points here, but that brings me to one of the questions or points that I wanted to bring up. There are people who are now turning their animals, in their dogs, cats, to vegans or vegetarians. And I have a friend who has a friend that I know of, who has a few dogs, and they've had the dogs on, I think, a vegan or vegetarian diet. And the dogs, all of them, have gotten they've gotten tumors, they've gotten sick, and that person still is not really thinking, well, geez, maybe I need to give them what they're supposed to eat. And this is now becoming a very common thing with folks, instead of looking at what the animal really needs to eat for the growth of the animal and the history of animals, that maybe that specific animal, that is so extremely important. Instead, I think we take such a moral turn with much of this that it leaves out common sense and logic. And I'm sure there's somebody out there that I'm probably offending at this point, but I'm not intending to offend. I am just calling a spade a spade. at this time. Does that all make sense in terms of what's going on and the animals and eating the food that they're is meant to eat?
Yeah, I think, there's some people that, their eating is based upon what they believe are sort of animal ethics based. And I think there's a lot of hypocritical things going on there. But I think when we look at, if you take a dog and you put him on a vegan diet for 6 years and you put a steak in front of him, I guarantee he's going to run and eat that steak up as quick as possible. A lot of the cats will start, they know how to hunt. And it's amazing how many animals, cats, domestic cats kill in the US. But so that, but I think the point is, a lot of people, they make these sort of vegan dog and cat foods and they look at it and they try to get it nutritionally complete. And they'll say, well, we've got all the amino acids and we've supplemented this and that. The problem with that is what we're finding out now through something called nutriomics. And I interviewed a great guy named Stefan Van Vliet out of Duke University. So they're looking at these individual different unique compounds that are found in foods. And for instance, beef, which I, would think, there's 150 different things in there. There's over 55,000 unique compounds in beef that have been discovered. And there's probably more that are, that still have yet to be determined. But because of that, and they did a really nice study back in 2019, I believe, or maybe it was 2020. And they looked at these plant-based alternative meats and they compared it to a regular hamburger. And they found only 10% of those 55,000 different unique compounds were actually available in those plant foods. So even if you think you're doing the right thing, you're missing out on probably 90% of the actual nutrition that the animal needs.
Yes, that I think, yeah, and sometimes separating, as we see even in human food, removing certain things, certain components, isolating it is not always ideal because all these compounds need to work together and not just, in isolation. It doesn't have the same force or power or capability or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have that because it's not working in concert with everything else that it was connected to or related to in the body or in the plant, in any of those things. Now, I'd like to address a little bit too, this idea of the moral issue. Now, I don't know how you can address that, how you want to address that, but I think that there's a lot of people that do take that moral stand. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and mention this and say this, but I mean, for myself, though, I was a vegetarian for like a very long time. I am not now. It was like 20 years. I am not at this time. But I think that there are people that do take more of a moral stand on it, but not really looking on at what we said earlier in the show is just historically, in terms of the evolution of human beings on the planet, as far as we know, what the diets have been like, and to get us to this point. As Dr. Shawn pointed out about the brain and the growth of the brain and so on, they were eating differently, and they were all at some point eating meat. And, I think we just need to accept that and be okay with that's what was happening. So anyway, I don't know if you want to address this idea of the moral issue.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think, when we look at human development, particularly children's development, I think as an adult, you should be allowed to eat whatever you want. And I'm more than happy to support people if they want to go on a plant-based vegan vegetarian diet. I'm totally fine with that. The problem I have is when you start trying to legislate or, guilt or force people to eat a certain way, because I think, certainly some people will do better on a different style of eating pattern. We should be allowed in accepting that. As far as the sort of moral thoughts that, by eating a plant-based diet, you're doing the least harm. That, is again, a relative term. And I think one of the things is, certainly you're not doing no harm. Clearly, I think everybody now understands that all food production results in, unfortunately, the loss of animal life, or, the displacement of animals, or, something negative is going on. Just being alive as a human, we're unfortunately doing that. But specifically to when it comes to agriculture, we see that this harvesting of grains or strawberries or tomatoes or grapes or oranges, birds die, small animals die. There's and people say that's unintentional, but it's not unintentional. If you think of the pesticides that are sprayed on crops, the very nature of that word pesticide has side in it, which means death. You are intentionally killing things to allow those crops to grow. And some people say, well, animals eat a lot of grains. And, in the US, that's true for soybeans and corn. But throughout the world overall, animals eat something like 35% of the grains that are growing. That's just grains. That's not all of the crops that are grown for humans. Humans by far eat most of our crops. And so if you're going to say you're on a plant-based diet, you're killing a lot of animals to do that. Whether you think it's intentional or not, it is occurring. And farmers are out there shooting little bunny rabbits that are eating the lettuce. And so, that's clearly happening. I know many ranchers and farmers. They tell me, I intentionally have to kill animals so that the crops will survive. Outside of that, you can point to the U.S. style system of, confined animal feeding operations, or the CAFOs, where you're concerned about, animals being crowded. That is something that I think is a legitimate concern, and I think we should continue to work to improve. But it doesn't mean that meat is bad for you, or we shouldn't be eating meat. We just need to improve the system. And clearly, and I know there's a lot of pushback on this, and this is a problem we see with these people that are vegan ideologues. They want to shut down any discussion about regenerative style animal agriculture, saying you can't do it, it won't work. When I have interviewed and talked to time and time again, dozens and dozens and now hundreds of people that are making this happen, and yes, it is scalable, and yes, you can sequester carbon, and yes, if we were to convert something like 40 to 50% of our agricultural pasture land into land that's been regeneratively managed, we could offset our entire carbon footprint. As a country, we could be carbon neutral if you want to use that metric. So there are so many ways we can make this solution outside of making everybody go vegan or vegetarian. And this is America, in the United States, if we look at the stats, and this is widely available on the EPA, if you go to EPA.gov and look at the greenhouse gas emissions, if every single, and based on these numbers, if every single American, you, I, and everyone we know were to magically go to vegan, and we made all the animals disappear too, we'd have to get rid of the animals because they're still there breathing and, belching and farting and that stuff. If we were to do that, get rid of every single 93 million cattle and 9 million horses and 9 million dairy cows and the 140 million cats and dogs and the sheep, all of them were to magically disappear, the effect worldwide would be a reduction in greenhouse gases of about 0.4%. Not even a drop in the bucket. It would be such a tiny amount to have every American do that. So it's not really a goal that we should say this is such an important thing to do. Should we improve the way we manage cattle and pigs and chickens? Yes, absolutely. But should we just shut the whole system down for something else? And, people are talking about, I think many people are sophisticated enough to know that the plant-based analogs, which are made out of, canola oil and pea protein powder and a bunch of artificial ingredients and chemicals, is not a health food. It's a processed food. It's more junk. But a lot of people are sort of enamored with this idea of cell cultured meat. We're going to grow these cell cultured meats. It's still going to be meat, but it's not going to harm the environment. You're not getting the full picture with that either. And this is an important thing that I think people need to realize before you buy off on that, because we see a lot of investment on that coming from places like Silicon Valley, where they're pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars to develop this stuff for the reason. And why do people invest in things? Because they want to turn 100x fold on their investment. They want to make a lot of money. They want to turn that, $20 million they kicked in into $2 billion. This is what we're doing. And if we look at cell cultured meat and we look at the process, first of all, from an ethical standpoint, as it stands today, now technology may change, it may not, but to grow those cells, you need to take fetal bovine serum. Where do you get fetal bovine serum? Well, you get it from you get it from a cow. You get it from a living cow fetus. So you have to slaughter a pregnant cow. You have to, aspirate blood from the fetus's heart while it's still alive without anesthetic, because the anesthetic will mess up the serum. So you have to do that, and you have to continually do that over and over and over again to produce this serum so these cells can grow in it. Not only is that, and then you have to feed these cells. The cells just don't make protein out of nothing. So where do you get the protein from? Well, you get it from these large monocrops of corn and soy and peas that are grown, destroying the environment, destroying the ground, destroying the biodiversity, and you need lots and lots of it. You need you need more of that than you would to grow a cow. A cow can eat grass, get most of its protein, but you've got to continually grow soybeans. And these are GMO crops with pesticides and herbicides and killing all the animals to grow the inputs. And then, these globs of cells don't have immune systems. So how do you prevent them from, getting infections? Well, as soon as you take it out of the bioreactor, you've got to bathe them in antibiotics and virucides and fungicides to protect that product so it doesn't, become an infection risk, and then you have to throw the whole thing away. And then all the waste products that are made, because these cells, as they grow, they make waste products. So you have to figure out how to get rid of that. How do you run those bioreactors? Lots and lots of fossil fuels. Remember, how do you run a cow? Well, it needs sunlight, it needs water. It's self-replicating, but these things need continuous inputs of fossil fuels. So they're not. What they're telling you is they're these great environmentally friendly things. They're not. They're just, they're gonna play with the statistics, and they're gonna say, well, they don't use as much water. Well, what is the water that goes into raising cows? We hear this, hamburgers takes up like 6 bathtubs worth of water. Well, the truth is 90, depending on what part of the world you're in, something like 94 to 98% of that water is rainwater. That water falls regardless. It's not like the cows are out there doing rain dances, making it rain. It rains regardless if there's a cow there or not, but they count that as the water used to make to make the cow, which is, again, it's just, basically, kind of a huge distortion of the data.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Wow. You shared a lot right there, and all very necessary information to this conversation that people really need to hear. Also, we're looking at a natural system that really is in place. There is a domino effect system as well. And then, of course, there is just a system for the ecosystem, how everything is actually working in concert to maintain and sustain life here on the planet. So there's a lot of other factors involved, on top of the fact that, plants are alive. There are so many new studies that's being done with technology and so on to show, the way trees communicate, that they do communicate, and that plants communicate, and that they respond. So I think there's a lot of things that we do not understand. And I think we just need to be okay with saying, what, I'm not real clear. I don't think I have the full understanding as to maybe how these things work before we just run off and jump on, the next fad or trend or idea floating around. Anyway, so I wanted you to say how can folks get a hold of you, and also you offer consultation, just anything that you would like to share that the audience can take away if they want to follow up with you and get your book and so on.
Yeah, I mean, just a comment, it's, you hear this sort of thing, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But as far as finding me, MeatRx.com, I have a meeting. It's available to the public. They can join for free every single day at 9 a.m., 7 days a week. I'm there. We have, 50 to 100 people in the meeting. It's a big, giant Zoom call. If you want to ask me questions, I'm happy. I always encourage people to do that. So if you want to actually talk to me, that you can do that for free through MeatRx. I do offer consultations through that website as well. I'm on social media. I'm pretty active on Instagram until maybe I get kicked off for espousing the wrong nutritional views. Perhaps that's coming down the road. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully not. But Shawn Baker 1967 is ShawnBaker 1967. I'm on Twitter at SBakerMD. I've got a YouTube channel under Shawn Baker. So that's where you are. I'm pretty accessible. I like interacting with folks. I tend to, if you ask me a question directly, I usually am able to answer it the best I can. Sometimes they're short answers because I end up, answering 300-400 questions a day sometimes, and, you just kind of run out of time. But if you really want to have I much prefer having a conversation than typing a response, because it's, again, like we talked about at the beginning, at least you can have some nuance there. At least people can understand if you're joking or not, due to your tone of voice. And whereas, if you type a thing, some people don't get the humor, and how dare you try to
misinterpretation.
Don't try to be funny on the internet on text, because sometimes it doesn't translate, and you get a lot of people upset.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to say, just to folks out there, it's like, could healing really be maybe this simple? I'm not saying that this is a cure-all, but I think this is something we have to look at, is like, could some of the things that we're trying to do, could it really be like much more simple than we've been led to believe? And maybe we've just gotten used to complicated as well. And so I think in taking that into account and then doing your own research and seeing, what works for you and so on. But this is definitely an option, because we've talked about other kinds of foods and diets and so on. And this, to me, was a necessary conversation. I did want to talk a little bit more about, but we're not going to have time to do that. You did mention the plant-based oils. And the reason why I was going to mention that again is because I have seen folks who have given testimonials who have really changed their lives and their health and so on. And one of the things that they did say was the oils. They realized that a lot of these plant-based oils really affected them, but they couldn't see it until they reduced and narrowed down, all that they were consuming.
Yeah, diet is real tough. One last comment, for the people that are kind of a little bit skeptical, there'll be a study. Harvard University is about to publish a study on this diet. So we'll have some of that in the medical literature. So that'll hopefully lend a little more credence for those that are still skeptical.
Yes. And I understand that. But, people who listen to this show, they also know that I tend to try things. I am all about that. I'm all about longevity. Everybody knows that. I'm all about really finding the truth of what's possible and what could work, and not about just being in denial and just lost in my own fog of what I think I don't like, but to really investigate. So I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Shawn Baker, for being on the show. It was definitely a pleasure having you here, and thanks for all that you've shared.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interact with your audience, and I appreciate it, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And of course, thanks to the listening audience. We are definitely at the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Do go to his website and check out all that we've talked about here today. Thanks to our engineer, D'Angelo Jones. Do visit theexpansionzone.com for the archive and for this show, which will be featured on the website as well if you want to listen to it again, and all of his information will be there. Also, our YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's posted there as well. And that's it. And to find out more about me, do visit therealsoniabarrett.com. And as always, I like to remind everyone to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.